Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. So I'm talking about seva and what it really means to me, and my learnings in this journey so far. Um, so in my early years working in the corporate world, I was once advised by one of my immediate seniors. The advice was, if your boss asks you to jump, the only legitimate question you should ask is how high. I remember thinking that this is probably the silliest thing I've ever heard till I became a student of Vedanta. To me, this advice is most pertinent and probably only pertinent to a guru and to our gurus. The kind of shraddha and the willingness to serve without any hesitation, that is really what Guru Seva is. In fact, serving one another is very, very inherent in Ishvara's order. If you just look at nature, right from whether it's a tree or a rock or an insect or an animal, every entity is contributing in accordance with its ability. It's only us humans, who have free will to choose to serve. And that itself is actually a blessing for us. It requires, of course, for us to have some amount of maturity and particularly to overcome barriers like, inertia to start with, some amount of maybe selfishness and many others. And to really, truly commit ourselves to the service of our gurus. It requires an inner richness and recognition of our privilege and our blessings. Right from being born in India, in this culture where Sanatana Dharma is alive and practiced, it gives us all an opportunity to not just be consumers, but contributors to this culture and to really pay it forward to the generations that come. Guru Seva teaches us to overcome our raga dveshas and gives us an opportunity to be an adhikari. It is, to my mind, the cornerstone of a Vedanta student's journey to knowing the truth. Moreover, when we serve with sincerity, dedication, and a commitment, just like we serve ourselves, we recognize the oneness and the connectedness that all that is here is Ishvara. So if we are lacking in Seva Bhava, then we need to examine what prevents us from doing Seva, or why do we hesitate? Because I really don't think there is any member, any one of us actually, who don't want to do Seva, but sometimes we hesitate. Silly things and sometimes big things, prevent us from doing it. So I'm really going to look at what are those few things that I think, uh, makes us hesitate to do Seva. And I want you to indulge me for the next few minutes because I'm going to share 9 such reasons. There are many, many reasons, but I'm just sharing 9 of them. And look at Seva as a growth opportunity for each one of us. A lot of this, like I said, has come from my personal experiences. Some might ring true for you all, some might not. But here goes. So the first thing, the very obvious one, I don't have the time. We are always juggling responsibilities, home, work, kids, family, friends. It's always a very, very busy life. But when we pause and reflect, we realize that we are not living by our priorities. And our commitment to moksha is actually wavering. We need to push ourselves and step out of our comfort zone and just do it. Do the seva that is required and demanded of you as a Vedanta student. The second could be, I don't think I can really do what is required. Here it's really about us, being very harsh and judging ourselves on our competence. We believe we can do some things and we can't do some things. And that might not necessarily be true. Unless we really go out there and try, we might not know it. And, should there be an off chance that we truly lack the ability required, then we need to just acknowledge it and reach out to our peers, to other students who can help us and get the job done. It's like Swamiji always says, do what is required and leave the rest to Ishvara. We need to do that and strengthen our karma yoga buddhi by just doing that seva and not, believing that we cannot do it or get it done. The third thing could be, I have been guilty of this and I'll share my experience. I don't really know the vidhi. There is so much tradition to Vedanta, and I've really stayed away from all these traditions and religion, and I come from a secular upbringing and education. And what if I make a mistake? These are things that goes on in everybody's mind probably. And this happened firsthand to me as recently as, the first lockdown. It was decided last year during the lockdown for Guru Purnima that I will do the Pada Puja for Swamiji. And I live very, very close by, so it was like a logical decision. It was a very first for me, so I was a little, apprehensive. And I could have sat and worried about it and stressed about it, or told Swamiji saying, no, 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 or told Swamiji saying, no, I don't think I'll do it. But instead, I just reached out to the one person I thought would be able to guide me and do a great job at it. So, of course, I reached out to Panchapakeshan. And I don't know if he's here, but I owe him that. And with his help and his, explanation of what needed to be done, how it should be done, etc., I did the Pada Puja along with my husband. The next reason could be, I'm sure somebody else, maybe somebody younger, will volunteer to do it. Here I want to start by saying that it is part of our Swadharma to do Guru Seva, irrespective of how old, young, capable, incapable we are. Each and every one of us must do Guru Seva. An opportunity to do Seva to our Gurujis when when we're not living and studying in a Gurukulam with them is actually a big, big, big blessing. And we need to recognize that. Seva to them is Seva to the Sampradaya, and that's really one step closer to moksha. And isn't that the reason why we're all here? Another reason could be, I'm a bit embarrassed to be labeled as religious in my social circles. And, I've been guilty of this too. In my initial years of Vedanta, I come from a career of advertising, and I have a lot of friends in advertising. And, advertising somehow seems another extreme to Vedanta. And so I would be like, these people will never understand, why I am a seeker, why I'm attending Vedanta classes. And I would hesitate to share things on social media because all of them are my friends, so-called friends on social media. So I have been there, and, I just want to stop here and tell myself first, all over again, because I think that's important also, is because all of us have been educated in this post-independence era where, convent education was a huge aspiration for our parents, for us, that we should study in a convent and we should know how to speak English. And I remember in my school, and I studied in a convent, we were not allowed to own up our culture in so many small ways in the name of discipline. Simple things. We were told not to wear a bindi. We weren't allowed to wear, mogra in the hair on some special occasions. Or if we had like the yellow thread on our wrist, we were told, during Nombu, we were told, oh, how come you're wearing that? And things like that. Okay. I think it's important for us to recognize and understand our childhood conditioning. And once we recognize it, I think the opportunity there is for us to grow beyond it. If we have accepted our identity as a Vedanta student and owned up to it and are attending classes, we must own up to our mumukshatvam as well and display integrity in our thought, word, and deed. We can't just be attending classes and then, think, oh, this religion thing is a little too much for me. That would be completely against what Bhagavan Krishna has said in the Bhagavad Gita. Arjavam is what I'm referring to here. Another hesitation could be, if Swamiji needs help, he will ask. We all know, at least Swami Brahmavidayananda, how independent he is. He rarely asks for help. And, if he wants help, he will ask, right? Some of us could be guilty of thinking that. Actually, seva is truly for our sake. It is for the student's sake. We grow while we do seva. Swamiji does not need us to do seva. Our surrender to his needs and requests will help the knowledge flow through us, for us. All seva done for Swamiji's here, goes to the parampara. And there isn't really a greater altar to surrender to. I remember long back when I used to tell Swamiji in my conversations with him saying, that I struggle with bhakti, Swamiji. It's very, very difficult for me. And I still remember him saying that if it's such a struggle, then consider what inspires you. And I just turned around and told him, you inspire me, Swamiji. To which he said, then that's the altar. Your guru is your altar, and you can, surrender and have all the bhakti at that altar. And that helped me really bring Ishvara into my life. Moving on. Mm. Sometimes we might think, if I'm asked to do something and I can't do it properly, then I don't want to really make a fool of myself. I don't want to maybe let down Swamiji. I've been a student of his for so long. Or what if Swamiji criticizes me or even corrects me? What do I do then? It's not a good feeling. To that, I will just say surrender to our Guru implies Shraddha. It really means what he says or does is really for our growth. So if he does criticize, if he does comment negatively, or if he does correct you, I think our immediate response must be to examine his feedback and understand the lessons inherent in it. And if we feel that we might let down Swamiji, then I will say that, in my opinion, we would let him down even more by not even attempting to do what he's asked us or what is required of us. And consequently, definitely not growing. Let me share a personal example here. Many of you may be aware that I'm helping Swamiji recreate his website. I started this in December 2020, and I was under the impression, and I really believed it, that it'll take me a couple of months because a lot of the content was already there. But a lot of things did not go my way. I was wrong. Many things, came as obstacles, and 8 months down, and his website is still WIP. Okay. But I recognize and acknowledge here that I have done my best and will continue to do it. And it has got delayed despite my efforts. And that is Prasada Buddhi and nothing more. And last but not the least, Swamiji is our guru. I think the one person in all our relationships in our life who will not judge us by our failures or our mistakes or any silly thing that we might say or do. I mean, if there's really one person in our lives who doesn't judge us, it is our guru. And we should recognize that and not worry about him criticizing us if we don't do something properly. Um, Another thing could be, it's really not something I enjoy doing, what I'm required to do. There's no fun in it. And here I will only say our sama and dhamma proficiency comes into play. We need to recognize that we are being led by our raga dveshas and not doing what is our swadharma. There is no option of not doing when it comes to Guru Seva. However messy, difficult, sometimes you might feel it's a thankless job too. But we must have the vairagya to recognize that it's a job that needs to be done and really look for fun in all our other activities. This is not an area for fun. I think recognizing that is a lot of viveka and vairagya. Lastly, I attend classes and I regularly give Guru Dakshina to my gurus. That could be maybe somebody who thinks that, maybe a junior person who's just entered Vedanta. And to him, because I was there too, to him, I will say, our journey of self-knowledge is not an ordinary journey. It is understanding that I am Satyam Jnanam Anantam Brahman. I am that pure, limitless consciousness, and that's what our Guru is pointing us out to. No amount of Guru Dakshina or Seva even can be truly measured against it. It is the promise of the limitless. And I think our understanding there must be reflected on. In sum, if we still, after these 9 reasons, and maybe you have thought of a few yourself, if we still need some inspiration to do Guru Seva, then we need to look no further than our own gurus, be it Swamiji or Swamini. They are fulfilling their rinam to the rishis and their gurus who stand in the parampara. They know, so they spread the teaching. It's as simple as that. Our seva to our gurus is an expression of our deep gratitude to them. Not only to them, it is to the parampara and to the continuity of Sanatana Dharma. So on this auspicious day of Guru Purnima, I would urge each and one of you to join me in committing ourselves once again to do Guru Seva to the best of our abilities to both our Swamiji and Swamini. Hari Om.
I've been asked to talk about how Vedanta changed my life, and I would like to talk a little bit on that. Just take 2 to 3 minutes to go through this whole journey and how it has impacted me. And um, I'm now in. I'm now very much in my 30s. My name is Naveen Nivarti. For those of you who don't know me, and I have been associated with Vedanta for the last 8 years or so now. A bulk of that time with Swamini ji, and also studying the works of Puja Swamiji. And the last few years have been really, I would not say it has been a roller coaster, because I think it has been exactly the other way around. It has been like very, very pacifying. I have lived an extended teenage for a bulk of my 20s, and have been very rebellious, and always had a scientific temper. And that scientific temper many a times came in the way of any kind of pursuit of knowledge, and especially any spiritual pursuit, of or yoga pursuit. And maintaining that temper, I have been able to continue on this path without trying to relinquish the other. And that has had immense effects. First is that Vedanta taught me that we cannot solve the problems, by using the same kind of thinking that has been used to create them, like Einstein said. And when I came to Vedanta, that's when I realized that you have to take the thinking to another level. If you have to solve your existential problems and problems that you've been kind of grappling with for many years. And that is where I think Vedanta had the first impact. It really moved my attention and desires, and took them to a different level, where I was now looking at values like independence, curiosity being nourished so that it leads to truth, tranquility, or and finding acceptance, self-worth, building on self-image in life. And I think that was the first impact that Vedanta had on my life. And there onwards, the next step was really to kind of shape it all up. And that's where the whole understanding of karma yoga came in very handy. I have always been very ambitious in my life, and like always been like a good son and a good student and a good employee and all that. But um, when I when I studied karma yoga, I realized that it was not enough to have these skill set. And I compare myself somewhat like to to a sailor navigating rough seas. You know, um, with skills you can navigate your ship through the turbulent ocean to a great extent, but you are still at the mercy of the ocean. And what Karma Yoga really taught me was that you can actually even calm down the ocean, with a change in your attitude, with this understanding that you don't have to be tossed around by these opposites of raga, dvesha, sukha, dukkha, shita, ushna, all these opposites that we are all the time battling throughout our lives. Most of our battles, I realized, are really emotional battles. They don't really have to do with money or um, status or power. It all kind of came down to emotions. And I realized that this whole viewpoint that Vedanta provides me, this vantage point that Vedanta provides me, it not just helps me sail through these oceans smoothly, but it also helps calm down the oceans. So that's something very interesting Vedanta did to me. Vedanta lifestyle essentially for me is a value based lifestyle. and that is something I have very actively tried to inculcate over the years. Not just, and the good thing about it is it's not. In fact, I don't use the word spiritual. I use it very sparingly these days because I don't think that there is something spiritual. Everything is spiritual, and that's what Vedanta teaches us. I mean, you cannot be one person in your workplace, one person in your family, one person when you are in satsanga, and one person when you are all by yourself. We are inherently the same people wherever we go, and if and these values that Vedanta teaches us, they play a role in absolutely every facet of our lives. They reflect, manifest in every role that we play, whether we like it or not. So with Vedanta, we could have this privilege of understanding and isolating and understanding these values in themselves, and then finding ways to put them into practice consciously. And that has definitely led to great benefits. In fact, over the last 5 years, I think I have made better decisions. I have My orientation is more long term than short term now. I have a more holistic view of life, and all that is really thanks to Vedanta. With Vedanta, another big impact on life was that it brought a lot of acceptance, not just self acceptance, but also looking at people and circumstances as facts rather than something that has been set up against you. There where there is malice and evil, and something that is doesn't want you to succeed or want you to be happy. It's not really like that. And when I start looking at everybody as facts, and the approach that you should have is just how you approach facts, with objectivity. um, that attitude really brought in a lot of acceptance. I think there is now much less conflict with personal life, between work relationships, personal relationships, family relationships. And finally, Vedanta taught me the importance of having a living teacher. I have been always an avid reader, and I used to do courses, and I used to do a lot of learning. That is definitely helpful, but it is absolutely nothing compared to working, studying, um, and reflecting with a living teacher. A living teacher not just unfolds the truth for you, but a living teacher is important because he or she contextualizes the truth in the present times, and that is something which is really important. A lot of people, I think, even in my own family, they don't look to Vedanta or traditional way of life simply because they think that it is outdated, and there was a time for it, and that is long gone. But it is only when you work with a living teacher that you understand that the teaching has to be contextualized to the times, and that's why the role of the teacher is so central in our spiritual tradition. The teacher also helps validate your understanding, because you can just go on a trip of thinking that I get it and I want to do this right now, and I'm like on cloud nine. But many a times it's not really the truth, and Swaminiji here can definitely vouch for those claims, those many claims that I made in the past, and I really had to fall flat on my face many a times. And plus, I think you always need a mentor. So, and the living teacher is really bringing all this, and I'm really trying to explain this in objective terms rather than using verses and um, um, Shruti. But this is really the fact, and this has been my experience. So thanks a lot, Swamini ji, for being there. I know I can reach out to you, and mm, also Swami Brahmavidasan ji whenever I need, and you would be there to support me. So finally, so this is the impact so far, but what about next? I think this journey continues. I'm trying to now live as much a life which is free of contradiction, going forward. And as I learn more about the world, as new research surfaces from different walks of life, from philosophy, from psychology, so all these topics that I may not read, I try to kind of put it all together on one canvas, uh, just to make sure that it all kinds of fits in together and is free of contradiction. So far, I think it has been a great journey, and there is now an acceptance that life is good for now, which was not really the case. Like I was always restless and racing, chasing, or hankering about for something, but it is not the case now. And there is much tranquility, and I mean it's a beautiful ride, and I try to savor every moment of it now. Thank you.
Pranam Swamiji, Pranam Swamini ji. Today the topic is commitment. Commitment to the study of Vedanta. Commitment is devoted dedication. Commitment depends on the goal one wishes to achieve. The goal over here is the study of Vedanta, which is the Shabda Pramana. Vedanta deals with spheres that are not available for perception and inference. It is a resolution of one's sense of isolation into the understanding of oneness. This is done with the help of Mahavakyas such as Tattvamasi, Aham Brahmasmi, Jiveshwar Aikyam. For the understanding of the Mahavakya, one needs a guru who is adept at the use of words to unfold the infinite with the help of finite words. The first and foremost requisite for a student is Shraddha. Shraddha in the words of the Guru and the Shastra. One may come to Vedanta for many reasons. I came from a knowledge-oriented background, but which had very little of bhakti and praise. I had realized that when I had problems and I tried to find a solution, hardly the solution would unfold, and yet another problem was standing there for me to attack it. And then I realized unknowingly that the solution was very limited, and my worldly pursuits were similar. They were very limited. I reached a sense of helplessness because I was not able to find solutions to my problems. It is this helplessness that propelled me to come to Vedanta. Once here, I reset my activities, being brutally honest with myself, doing a cost benefit analysis, and I found I created more physical time for myself. For example, I thought that doing 7 days exercise, 7 days of a exercise regime would give me a fit and healthy body. But later I revised it to just 4 days a week. And hence I had more physical time available for me. Having done the Bhagavad Gita with my guru thrice over, a Karma Yoga lifestyle had slowly crept into me. This gave me Karma Yoga Buddhi. It helped me to reduce my Raga Dvesh, and I was able to look at my emotional health. And I did a lot of mind work with our Guruji. Therefore, that helped me to grow psychologically. Karma Yoga Buddhi helped me to lead a life of duty and devotion. And then I finally understood or accepted Ishvara as the law of Dharma. This resulted in a relative amount of Antakarna Shuddhi. And with all these above things, my mind became more peaceful and it was more available for me. Ignorance is in the mind and knowledge takes place in the mind. Therefore, mind management is absolutely necessary. We have to develop adhikaritvam. These are the qualities required by a student to be able to understand. The qualities are sadhana chatuschayaha, that is vivek, vairagya, shat sampati, and mumukshutvam. I would take it a little further. From mumukshutvam, we should become jignasus, and then we will become jnanis. I continued to attend classes doing Shravanam. Shravanam is done by suspending your own pet ideas and notions and going along with the words of the teacher and getting insights. Mananan, I did a lot of it with fellow students, with Swamiji. This was to remove the vagueness and doubt about the knowledge. And finally, Nididhyasanam, to own up the truth. Having more physical time and mind space, I now incorporated more japa, prayers, and meditation. And as such, I brought more of Ishvara into my life, if I can use such a phrase. This helped me to surrender my ahankara at the altar of understanding. I got Ishwar Kripa and Antakarna Naichalyam also to a very good extent. It is here that I refined my Adhikari quotient. I made a conscious effort to do this. All the above was being done, and simultaneously, I continued the study and consistently and systematically studied under the guidance of our Guru. And now to go from Mumukshu to Jignasu to Jnani. Mumukshutvam is a desire for freedom. It is Moktum Ichha. Jignasu is a person who has Jnatum Ichha, a desire for knowledge. One needs to convert this desire for freedom into a desire for knowledge with the Shraddha and the understanding that in knowledge alone lies my freedom. Thus, I would say I continue to study with my Guru continuously, systematically, and to give a conclusion to this commitment, we need to do priority setting, lead a Karma Yoga lifestyle, mind management, adhikaritvam, bring Ishvara into your life with prayers, japa, and meditation, and finally Nididhyasanam, where I can own up the truth of my own true nature. This is almost like a lifestyle change we need to make in ourselves. It is not otherwise possible to be able to understand the truth. Although we have a very good teacher who keeps unfolding it for us, yet it will be very difficult if we do not make all these changes in ourselves. Thank you.
Gurubhyo Namaha. The topic I'm speaking about is Seva in the modern context. And Sunita just did such a phenomenal job. I will just be touching upon a few things that she only said. She has already said. So I start with words of Puja Swamiji. Living begins when one contributes something that will bring about more happiness, more wisdom, and more freedom. Until then, one merely drags one's life. These words, I feel they cut through the fog of wants and desires that seem to engulf me every now and then, quite often. As I carry out my many roles, I find that it is very easy to get carried away by immediate worries of responsibilities. I have bills, there are errands, never-ending task list, and the family drama. These worries create a situation where I'm very focused on what I need, or at least what I think I need. And before you know it, life seems very hollow, very shallow. Is this all there is to living? Indeed, it does seem a drag. And yet, when I'm able to find something useful that I can do for someone other than myself or my immediate family, then there is this palpable spring in my step. It is in this context that I see Seva. Finding ways to contribute helps me expand the concept of mine. When I care about more, I find that I'm capable of more. This feeds a feeling of fullness that brings more back into my life. So more cheer, more purpose, more energy, more grace, and more Ishvara. In the Bhagavad Gita, Bhagavan Shri Krishna gives us 20 values that will help prepare the mind, our Antakarna, inner instrument, for self-knowledge. The knowledge that frees us from all feelings of being limited, in being a limited, incomplete being. The sixth value he lists is Acharya Upasana. An Acharya is one who leads by example. Given that one has had the blessing of finding a true Acharya or Guru, Acharya Upasana is the seva one offers to the Guru. Now, certainly, Guru does not need the seva for themselves. One can see that they lead very simple lives where their personal needs are very few. So then why does Bhagavan place so much importance on this value? Because the end goal of Acharya Upasana is growth for the student. Growth involves challenging the strong ahankara enough to change one's attitudes. By working through our resistance, keeping our ego aside, and doing what needs to be done, we grow. Why do we need to grow? Without growth, our hearts remain constricted. We feel small and vulnerable, stuck in me and mine. Such a person cannot gain the full understanding of the teachings of the Gita or the Upanishads. So we ask, and the Guru guides us by giving us activities that they know will lead to our growth. We ask questions. We know that this knowledge, we ask because we know that this knowledge will free us, will help us see that we were always free but could not see it. This kind of seva also gives us an opportunity to observe the Guru up close and see how the teaching is reflected in their life and how they deal with the people and situations around them. There is much to observe and absorb from a wise person. Through and through, it is an advantage, a benefit, a blessing for the student. While the teaching is timeless and the goal is timeless, the means of seva can change based on the times. There was an era when grazing the Guru's cows or tending to the fields may have been the most apt seva. Today, these would not apply to most of us city dwellers. The Guru has devoted their life to this teaching, and they bring this teaching into the lives of so many others. I can align myself with this cause and offer whatever I can. I can ask how I can be useful. In an ashram setting, this may be a contribution of manpower where needed. Outside, it could be a contribution of effort that can help free up the Guru to carry out their teaching activities. Maybe one can offer art and design work, or video editing, transcription, writing, maintaining communication groups and channels, some legwork for various tasks, coordinating events, reaching out to others who can also benefit, may even be watering a small garden or taking care of delivering necessities. Even through coordinating a delivery service, there are so many ways of doing these things. The specific task will depend on the Guru and the student in the equation. The broader goal is always growth for the student. So we ask, we offer our ideas, and when the Guru gives us options, we understand the reason behind it. We sound out our reservations, if any, with them, and yes, we say yes and proceed to reap the benefits fully. I have done some work on some transcription. I have done a little work on Swaminji's book, and now I'm working with the newsletter. I find that this has given me an opportunity to dwell on the teaching in a way that otherwise I would not have had. I want to, there is a wish to do it, but I don't think the discipline would have been easy. This gives me that opportunity. So it has been amazing. It also gives me avenues of interaction with my Guru. We discuss so many things, many related to teaching, but many things seemingly unrelated to teaching. But it gives me opportunity to observe and see how she deals with the situations, how she gets so much done. And then I pause and I reflect and I see, what do I really want and what am I doing and what can I do? So it's been a blessing through and through. So thank you so much, Swaminiji. With this, I stop.
Pranam Swamiji, Pranam Swaminiji. My journey with Vedanta started almost 10 years ago. I was in a terribly low and helpless frame of mind, suffering from a major slip disc and engulfed by family problems. That's when my sister introduced me to Swami Brahmavidananji, and Swamiji was kind enough to start Gita classes at my house. And consequently, I attended many other Upanishad classes by him. The first few years, because of my work-related travel, I breezed in and out of the classes and never had a sense of commitment. All that seems to have changed thanks to the pandemic. I've had a lot more time on my hands and I'm gradually prioritizing Vedanta over my other activities. Music, reading yoga, now taking a back seat. I only read spiritual books and I even hear Vedanta while walking. And even the friends I seem to be drawn to are the ones who are more spiritual. Zoom has made a huge difference as my classes can go with me wherever I go. I look forward to all the classes and I try and do my assignments regularly. And I'm really enjoying the subject of self-knowledge more and more. I'm currently studying Isha Upanishad with Swamiji and repeating Bhagavad Gita with Swaminiji. I listen to Swamini's podcast, Rivers of Wisdom, regularly and have included most of the mantra chants she has taught in my daily prayer. I learned the Vishnu Sahasranam chanting as well, enjoyed the process, and now I'm able to do it with ease. Thanks to the Niti Dhyasanam that Swamiji taught us, the quality of my daily prayers has really improved. There's a huge change from a mechanical prayer to a more meaningful connection with Ishvara. Since I have benefited so much from Vedanta, I thought it would be nice to introduce it to my friends. So for my 60th birthday, I ordered Swamini's book, You Matter, Insights from Vedanta, to give as gifts to all my friends. This teaching seems to be seeping into my dreams as well. The other day, I remembered a dream where I was helplessly trapped in a roller coaster and being tossed over the mountains. First, I was enveloped by fear, and then I surrendered myself to the Lord, relaxing into the faith. My commitment to Vedanta seems to be growing as it's helping me to cope better with my existential problems, and I'm slowly owning up to the final reality